Lesson today comes from Luke 24, verses 13 through 35. This is happening on the day of the resurrection. Now, on that same day, two of the disciples, were going to a village called Emmaus, which is about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" They stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place in these days?" He asked them, "What things?" They replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the third day since these things took place. Moreover, some of the women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and when they did not find his body there, they came back and told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said he was alive." Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see him. Then Jesus said to them, "How foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and enter into his glory?" Then beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them all the things about himself in all the scriptures. As they came near to the village which they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going on. But they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it is almost evening and the day is now nearly over." So he went in and stayed with them. And when he was at table with them, he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road? While he was opening the scriptures to us?" That same hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions gathered together. They were saying, "The Lord has risen indeed and has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of the bread. Friends, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Our congregation is similar to the crew on a sailboat. We support each other through the thunderstorms and the sunny days to make sure we arrive at the beacon. The Holy Spirit burns in our church, inspiring us to go out into the community to help others as we have been taught to do. You may be seated. My friend Denise is an accomplished lawyer who works for the Environmental Protection Agency in Washington, D.C. She was in the government's legal team, which was involved with the settlement with the Deepwater Horizon aftermath of the spill. That plus, she's just an all-around awesome person. Denise is always looking for ways to be caring to her community, to support people. She's always looking for things to do, and amazing things happen to her. I've heard the phrase once, "Good stories happen to those who can tell them." She can tell them. A few weeks ago, on Easter, this is what she wrote on Facebook. "Yesterday at Target, I bought a whole Easter basket full of stuff, just because it felt like the right thing to do. There are enough kids around my apartment building to make use of an Easter basket, I thought. But Easter happened, and I brought the basket in from my car. Tonight, I was planning to cook, but went out for a walk instead, and met Angelique, who is about 8, and her mom, Janira, who were by the 7-Eleven. We chatted a bit. Their Easter didn't sound like it had gone as planned. I asked, Angelique, did the Easter bunny find you? No, she said. Well, I think that rabbit must have left your basket at my house, I said. What? She said. Yep, I'll be right back, she said. I'm coming with you, she said. We walked to my apartment and went inside. Sure enough, the basket was on my table. We took it back to the 7-Eleven. On the way, she told me, everyone is really an angel. All of us have God living inside of us, inside our hearts. Where did you learn this? I asked. Oh, no one told me. I figured it out by myself. Inside that basket, we found bubbles, chocolate, sidewalk chalk. We had great fun blowing bubbles and decorating the 7-Eleven sidewalk with our chalk walk drawings. The neighbors were amused too. Happy Easter. You can see a picture of Angelique and Denise on the front of the bulletin. Happily coloring. The story of Denise and her new friend Angelique happily decorating the sidewalk outside their 7-Eleven caught my eye. Not only because of Denise's ever-present generosity, but because of what Angelique said about God. She said, everyone is really an angel. All of us have God inside. All of us have God living inside of us, inside our hearts. That's a pretty good sermon. It's remarkably more so when you think it came from a second grader. Angelique is making sense of her world with an internal dialogue with God. I've preached sermons like that, in one way or the other, where I talk about how we see the image of God in others, and Angelique backs me up on that. The Bible and our faith tell us that we have been created in God's image. And so when we look at one another, when we look at another person, we don't just see a beloved child of God. But we've been taught that when we care for that other person, we are honoring God in them. We care for God as we care for that other individual. And Angelique sees God readily in other people. God is living inside of us, in our hearts. The simplicity of her perspective helped me unveil a belief which maybe we take for granted. To be moral, to be kind, to be fair, because it's the right thing to do, or because maybe that's what our parents taught us to do, that's worthwhile doing, even if it's somewhat a detached motivation. If instead, our motivation for that course of action is because we realize God is within us, trying to act through us to impact others, then that motivation is as close to us as our heartbeat. The substance of our life is connected to recognizing that we have God living in us, and acting based on that, we can envision how we ourselves are channels of God's love and God's presence. The story we read from the gospel, as the disciples were walking on the road to the city of Emmaus on the very day of the resurrection, although they didn't know about the full details of resurrection. That story helps us think of just how this idea that God may be living within us, in our hearts. In their grief, these disciples could not recognize that Jesus was right there walking with them, talking with them. That's similar to what happened to Mary Magdalene at the tomb. She didn't recognize him either at first. Not only could they not see God in the face of a stranger like they should have, they couldn't recognize this stranger was God. But then a nice thing happened as they reached their destination. The disciples, acting with hospitality as they should have been, offered the stranger to stay with them. Don't go. It's too late. You won't get to your destination with daylight. Stay with us. Have some dinner. Well, good for them. That's the nice thing to do. It's that next scene, which we remember every time we serve communion. It's that next scene where Jesus, who is the guest, all of a sudden maybe sits at the head of the table or something and becomes the host and takes the bread and gives thanks and breaks it and gives it to them. And in that action, their eyes were opened and they recognized him. And as quickly as they recognized him, he disappears. He's gone. And so the disciples begin to think, playing back on the day's events, playing back the events of that evening, and realized that they were feeling something as Jesus spoke to them, as Jesus talked about the scriptures. Something in them, something warm in their hearts was happening. And it's worth highlighting here, the disciples looked within themselves to see not just God at work, but God in the context of this person who was speaking to them. And without quite naming it, they realized that God is in them, that Jesus was in them as he was speaking to them. They felt him in their hearts as they were walking, as they were talking. They said, didn't we feel this and that when he was talking? Not only was Jesus out here, something was in here. Jesus was in here. By considering how Jesus was in their hearts, when they return back to the other disciples, they carry Jesus with them. And they begin to see themselves in a new light. Maybe beginnings of understanding new purpose. I go back to what little Angelique said. We all have God living inside us. And with that being the case, it makes us wonder what God is up to in here. As we celebrate this year's wonderful confirmation class with us, I am in awe of their internal reflection of faith. How they see God working in them and through them. Together and individually, they have explored questions of faith and of community, questions of God's presence, questions of God's reality, questions of God's activity in the world around us. And like the disciples at the end of the story, you as the confirmation class have been able to articulate that you've been feeling something in your hearts, that you've been feeling called to live out your faith in a way that I find new and refreshing. Your statements of faith, which you presented to the session, were personal and were moving. And you help us see God living in your hearts. And together you wrote this wonderful statement of faith, which we have been reading and which we now see in visual form on the banner. And in that and through that, you show us how you see God in yourselves and then you help us see God in you as well. So our journey of faith is like that road to Emmaus. It is a journey of discovery of what is deep inside of us already and what is right in front of us, as plain as day. It is a journey